Alô? Okay, let's go. There is a countdown or can start? Okay. So good afternoon. I'm Maureen Santos. I'm from Brazil, from an NGO that's called FASE, and also from the Institute of International Relations from PUC Rio de Janeiro. And I'm very glad to be here, and thanks for having me also. Um, and I want to as a warm welcome to this session, including developing countries in the low carbon agenda, supporting the design of coherent economic and fiscal strategy. So this panel is organized by the Agence Française de Développement in partnership with UN CEPAL and the Institute for Climate Economics. Um, Before I present our panelists, and we have two that's online, I just introduce the panel that most developed countries are adopting deliberate policies and fostering technological change to promote the low carbon transitions towards the carbon neutrality. So these policies have implications not only domestically, but also into internationally via global value chains. This scenario is generating a quick structural change where low emissions industries are gaining importance and high emissions industries are declining. So this session look up to developing countries and aims to discuss countries' macroeconomic constraints in this scenario of the low carbon transition and avenues to address these then policies and financial management. So let me present the first panelist, José Eduardo Alatorre, que es, perdón, he is Economic Affairs Officer from Economic Commission for Latin American Caribbean, CEPAL, from UN. So thank you to be with us.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, the DFC Pavilion, for hosting this event and for the invitation, Guilherme, in particular. Well, I'm going to make a presentation. If you could please project my presentation. Thank you very much. And the presentation that I'm going to do is based on our last two institutional documents in which we presented an analytical framework to help us reflect on how to achieve the goals of sustainable development, namely the social, the economic, and the environmental goals. And we call this framework the three-gap model. The next slide, please. And it stresses the importance of implementing policies for simultaneously address the different development challenges. And before we go to this analytical framework, I would like to start with some context. The next slide, please. Just before the pandemic, the region was experiencing a period of near zero growth, economic growth, with negative implication, of course, in job creation and poverty reductions, with our social goals. And this slowdown in economic growth is partly explained because in relation to its size, our region invests a very small share of its GDP. Our region invests only 20% of its GDP in average, and we have to compare this with the share of its GDP that other more dynamic economies like Korea, China, or India are investing. That is more than 20% of its GDP. So that is one of the reasons of the low economic growth. Sorry. So to fulfill its social goals, our regions require one, more investment to boost economic growth and to create more jobs and to reduce poverty. And we have estimated that we need to end with poverty by 2030, we need to grow at least 4% every year from now to 2030. In addition to, the next slide please, in addition to the to redistribute measures, and also to sustain this growth of economic of 4% of 4% annually. We need to increase investment to GDP ratio from gradually from 20 to 30%. And but we have, even though we can do this, we experience two challenges with high economic growth. The first is related to the environmental pillar of sustainable development, and the other is related to the economic pillar of sustainable development. The next slide, please. The first challenge is common to all economies, and is that under the current development pattern, the more economic growth we have, the more emissions and the more environmental footprint. As we can see in the graph, there are no high income country with per capita emissions consistent with the targets that we agreed in the Paris Accord. So, and why is this happening? In the region, for instance, we see that the increase when our income increase, and because also of the bad quality of public transportation systems, car ownership has increased faster than population and faster than the economy, and obviously with more car ownership, the demand of oil increases. So the emission increases, and this is a process of a vicious circle of development. In fact, in the last 30 years, emissions related to transportation have experienced the fastest growth in the region. And at the same time, the next slide, please. At the same time that we have this, 27 out of 33 countries submitted new, more ambitious commitments to climate action, pledging to reduce emissions between 22% and 28% with respect business as usual scenario by 2030. And to comply with this commitment, if we don't introduce further decarbonization measures, the only economic growth compatible with these commitments is negative. It's around minus 0.3% per year. So every time that we implement new decarbonization measures, it opens room for more economic growth. But if we don't implement decarbonization measures, or every percent of economic growth additional will increase emissions, and we will not comply with the Paris Agreement. So with the current economic structure, any economic growth is environmentally unsustainable. And the second challenge is that comes with high economic growth is associated with the economic structure of America, Latin, and the Caribbean. Our region is specialized in the production of goods related to natural resources. And these are products the products that we trade with the rest of the world in exchange of more complex and with more technology integrated manufacturers. And these are goods that we don't produce. And because of the bundle of goods that we exchange, when we grow fast, we tend to buy more goods than what we sell. So we experience a systemic trade deficit that we should finance by debt. And so we see that under the current economic structure, the next slide, please. Under the current economic structure, if the world grows at 3%, that is roughly the rate that it has grown for the last 30 years, the region could only grow 3% without increasing external debt. So growing at 4%, that is the rate that we require for complying with our social goals, we would need to increase debt in order to fulfill our goals. So with the current economic structure, we see that economic growth is also financially unsustainable. So to sum up, to achieve our social goals, we need to grow at least 4%, but the growth consistent with our environmental and economic goals are lower. So the difference among these rates is what we call the three gaps. The next slide, please. The problem is how to close these gaps, this difference between these economic growth rates. We have identified in CEPAL some sectors capable of driving what we call the big investment push for sustainability, and these sectors plays an strategic role in closing the three gaps by promoting technical change, increasing employment, and reducing import needs, and reducing also the environmental footprint at the same time. The next slide, please. Uh, I'm don't mention all the I won't mention all the sectors that we have identified, but two of them that are really important are the renewables, where the potential of the region is immense, and compared to fossil fuel renewables have more job and output multipliers per kilowatt hour produced, and the investment to substantially increase the share of renewable is cheaper with respect to a current policy scenario. And the other one is retrofitting the bus of the public transportation system. That is changing those buses from internal combustion engines to renewable. That has to be done with a local workforce, so it will create jobs and will be cheaper than buying from China or from another country the new bus. The next slide, please. And just to the next slide, please. The next, please. I will skip this. The next, the next, please. And the next. That's to finish. Well, um, in terms of policy to promote these sectors, governments need to create a regulatory framework so they can be deployed at scale. And fiscal and financial policies should support transformative sectors to modify the relative returns of investment in their favor. So we need to put a carbon tax, redirect subsidies, use the fiscal space to support renewables and other innovations, also applying, for instance, different discount rates for public investment for green projects. And the impact in employment and growth could be also potential, would be higher if we try to integrate, harmonize these frameworks at the regional level. So we can see that the climate action is an opportunity, but we need to provide the enabling condition to fulfill it. And with that, I will finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, José Eduardo. It's very good presentation. It's very important to think about this challenge when you start about talk about the challenge of the implementation of the environmental pillar of sustainable development. And you think about that when this concept was created in 1992 and until now you not have the fully formula to implement that. It's a very interesting thing. And the proposals of how you organize and implement this, to face these three gaps of the need of structural change, decarbonization, and the technical progress. And with this line of redistribution that I saw, like the fourth gap, maybe they are transversal, but at the same time is so important. In Brazil, we are facing this debate right now again, and I think it's very important talks. So I will pass right now to our second panelist, João Paulo Braga. Nice to see you. He is economist from BNDES, a researcher at I4CA, and also from the new school for social research. So the floor is with you.
Thank you to organizers, Guilherme, and for the great presentation. I'll present today the research I've been undertaken at the I4CE and at the new school with Professor Will Semler in New York City. Views are my own, and our discussion is related to green fiscal policy and the benefits versus the other fossil fuel intensive fiscal instruments. Next slide, please. Yeah, sorry, unfortunately, yeah, thank you, because I was not able to see the slides. Thank you. So the main question is, what are the economic benefits of a greener fiscal policy for developing countries? We know from the economics theory, first the climate economics theory, that we'll have in the future these stranded assets, which are carbon-intensive assets that will lose value and then drive crashes in financial markets and economic downturn cycles, like bringing financial instability, and lower growth regimes. What we also know from economics theory and also from the presentation we just had, that carbon-intensive investments are related to the market volatility and constraints for countries. What's important to add here, which is also considered in economic theory, is that there are volatilities of business cycles for developing countries that are related to commodity dependence that bring external constraints, as we have discussed. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the context of the discussion here is, can you hear me well? The context for the discussion here is that countries have been increasingly use green fiscal instruments, especially green bonds and carbon pricing. You can see this plot the trend in the past years of the use of carbon tax and green bonds. However, we should note that green bonds specifically are mainly used for energy transport utilities, when you know that there are challenges for other sectors in developing countries, especially agriculture, related to climate challenge, of course. And we also have seen that green bonds are mainly issued in advanced countries. More than 70% of the bonds are issued by these countries. Next slide, please. The point here is that some countries might be losing the benefits in combining different fiscal policy instruments in order to have a more effective climate policy combined with effective fiscal policy. There are benefits in combining carbon pricing and green bonds, and we show that in some studies that the New School and at the World Bank. We have potential revenue increasing from carbon taxes, as we know, but as carbon taxes might face political constraints, green investments at the short term, large-scale green investments at the short term, might solve some political constraints by providing bridge financing. So we can have green infrastructure and green jobs in the present as well. But what I would like to raise as the most important benefits of green bonds in this presentation and in our studies is that green investments might also bring benefits in terms of capital costs and financial stability. In the next slide, I show some data about green bond returns in financial markets. And there is a growing evidence in the literature that green bonds have lower yields than conventional bonds, which of course will impact capital costs of green investments and reduce capital costs of green investments versus conventional investments. It might increase fiscal space of countries if countries issue green bonds instead of conventional bonds. Next slide, please. But also on the side of the financial investor, it seems this is study that was published in it seems that green bonds for the financial investor also provide better return to risk ratio. So there are premium for green assets versus carbon-intensive assets in the financial market. Next slides. And this is important because when you look at the relation of returns and risks, we also bring an important variable for economic analysis of fiscal policy, bonds, which are basically fossil fuel bonds, and the right green bonds. After the COVID-19 crisis, just right at the beginning when they had an oil shock, you can see that the returns of carbon intensive bonds had decreased even more than green bonds, which are more stable after the crisis. And this we can see in the whole time series. The next slide, I tried to open the discussion for other commodity prices, which is a challenge for developing countries. So can we see the same for other carbon-intensive commodities prices? And this is study that we're just finishing to publish this year. We look at the different time series of different commodity prices and try to relate this behavior with green bonds, green equities, and fossil fuel equities in the financial markets. And we see that indeed for agricultural prices, for example, we have the same result. So green instruments can also have this type of productivities. However, here I for my conclusions, start my conclusions. Next slide. However, one should note that these results for agriculture might be the lower share of agricultural investments related to climate and funded by green bonds. So one point is that increasing green bonds for agriculture should be part of the agreement, but also, and here the main takeaway of the presentation, fiscal policy can benefit from undertaking investments. It's most likely the result would be positive for the conclusion. Yeah, with higher fiscal base, attracting new investors, and also for regarding protection for financial stability. So countries should try to diversify their activities from carbon-intensive activities to green activities. Thank you.
Thank you, João Paulo. Thank you for presentation. So now I will pass the floor to Guilherme Magacho. He is senior economist from French Development Agency, AFD. So thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you very much all for joining us in this debate. Can you put the slides, please? Yeah. So basically what I'm presenting here is the model that we're developing at TFD, where we're basically trying to discuss some of the main issues that we are discussing in this session here, the three-gap model, for example, the importance of green bonds and carbon market price zones, to show a little bit from this structural perspective, what are the main constraints that may emerge in developing economies. And we applied, the first country that we applied this model was Uzbekistan, so that's why it's interesting to have the deputy minister here with us. So, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. Well, a little bit more. There is like the basic idea of the the basic idea that we have in this work is that green transition is a structural change, a rapid structural change where some industries will emerge and some other industries will decline. Why? Because as all the other revolutions that we have in history, there are some industries that are more coherent with the paradigm that we're now, and there are industries that are definitely not coherent. In this case, the non-coherent industries are those that are very emitting industries. For example, if you're thinking about electricity from fossil fuels, especially from coal, this is something that in the next few years, we hope it's going to finish. On the other hand, there will be industries that will emerge because basically we need new industries to replace them. We need new source of energy. And of course, cultures will be impacted in very different ways depending on their structure of production, trade, and finance. So that's why we're looking at these structures to understand. Next, please. Well, and we look for these in three perspectives, very similar but not the same as the three-gap model. We are looking from the balance of payment constraints that may emerge because countries need to import machineries, countries need to import inputs to produce these new energy sources, to produce these new goods that will emerge. But if they depend a lot on the old school or on the sunset industries, then they will face a lot of balance of payment imbalances. They don't have like the exchange necessary to import these goods. In the fiscal level, it's the same story, of course, with a different reason. Countries will need to invest a lot in infrastructure, training, social protection systems, and if they depend, and this is the case for most of the countries that depend, for example, in fossil fuels, if they depend on these industries to raise fiscal revenues, basically, they will face a lot of fiscal imbalances. And in terms of employment and wages, something that we are talking here about the inclusion, one way of including people, actually the most interesting way, is giving jobs for them. If they have jobs that they are well paid, usually formal jobs, then we'll have like a social, the social side of the just transition will happen. But because some countries depend a lot on these industries to generate these jobs, we have to look at the specificities directly and indirectly, not only in the industry itself, but all these other industries that are related to them. And then we use the input-output approach, which allows us to see how this is spread through countries, other countries, through sectors, other sectors, to understand these dynamics. The next, please. Well, basically here we have a distribution of the, of course, like, it varies a lot from country to country, so we have a distribution of the CO2 emissions, and we define based on these the sunset industries. As we see, there are some industries that are usually considered as sunset industries for most of the economists, like fossil fuels that we're saying. But also, if you look at here, we have cement, you have a lot of transportation, then we have to think about these industries like even either they will have to change the way they are producing them, or they will be completely replaced. The next, please. And then we define these 5 industries that are considered as the key industries that we will call them the sunset industries. Fossil fuels, metals, specific metals, of course, like non-mineral metals, in the case of cement, for example, fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers, and electricity from fossil fuels itself. The next, please. Well, looking at the fiscal exposure, that's something that I will focus here, which is specifically interesting for the countries that we are analyzing. The sectors that generate this fiscal exposure varies a lot from country to country. We have, for example, Bolivia is very, the third from down to the other side. Like Bolivia is very dependent. Like 30% of the fiscal revenues on Bolivia comes from these sunset industries. But what is important in Bolivia? In the case of Bolivia, is mining and quarrying, for example, and indirect impacts. It's different, for example, than if you look at the Trinidad and Tobago, which is basically chemicals, where you have refined petroleum. It's a sector that's very important for the country. And then the fiscal revenue comes from different sources. And the next, please. And this is in the horizontal axis, and the vertical axis will have the exposure from the external perspective. Basically, how the countries depend on these industries to raise foreign exchange. So they need this foreign exchange to pay the imports. And the red points are those that they have like low complexity, green complexity potential. So they if you are in the top right, it means that you are depending for fiscal revenue, depending on these industries for foreign exchange, but also you have an issue that you don't have the technological capabilities to produce these goods. So these countries, besides being exposure to low carbon transition, they are very vulnerable. You have, for example, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador in Latin America, but also in Trinidad and Tobago, but also Kuwait, Algeria, Gabon. And on the other hand, you have like India, which is in the down right side, which is very dependent on these industries to raise to raise tax revenues. But it's a blue point, dark blue point. It means that it's a country that it has all the capacity to move from these new industries. For example, in the case of India, they depend a lot on cement, but they are producing now green cement. Of course, it's not widespread in the country, but they have the capability to produce this green cement. The next, please. In the social level, we also have these. We have wages and employment. Some countries may vary from one to another, but it's like wage and employment are very important. Next, please. And then you have, like, in the vertical axis, employment and wages. So the countries that are in the top right are those that are paying the good. You have like a lot of dependence on these industries to generate employment and to pay these good wages. Ukraine, Venezuela, Bolivia again, Trinidad and Tobago. These countries are like the most exposed ones. So the next, please. We can look at these from different dimensions, and we have here a map of the countries, like these 8 countries here. Next, please. And we cluster the countries into based on these different dimensions that can be exposed. And if we look at this map, we see that some countries, for example, Venezuela and Bolivia, but also Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine, they are very exposed in all dimensions, while some countries, like in North Africa, you have Algeria, for example, or Libya, they are exposed in the external dimensions, but Egypt, India, Brazil, China, Argentina, Peru, they are more exposed in the socioeconomic dimension. The next, please. Yeah. And just to conclude, I brought some data that we did some studies specifically for Uzbekistan. And if you look at the industries that are responsible for the emissions in Uzbekistan, of course, like the direct emissions, which is the gray bar, we can see that power is the most important one. But if we include the indirect emissions, the embodied emissions in imports or in the production of energy, or we see that construction is also an important sector. And then the next, please, just to conclude. We did this analysis on what's the change in the importance of every single structural factor to determine this emission. And what we see is that the country is being capable of decoupling. They are growing. The final demand has grown by 28% from 2010 to 2015. But the emissions had declined because the country was able to reduce the emissions, the emission density, and use more effective, more efficient way the inputs. And then the next slide is just to show you we can look at sectoral level. This is something very important for us. And in the case of Uzbekistan, what we have is something that's very interesting, because in many agricultural sectors, for example, crops, they were able to decouple, but because they are more and more dependent on gas, refineries, and oil products, you have the other side of the coin. So the country has to think about the model of development based on these different sectors that they will, let's say, support in the near future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Guilherme. So, our last panelist, we're very happy to be with us. Mr. I don't know if I say your right name, so excuse already. Mr. Ilkon Northkulov. Thank you. He's the first deputy minister from the Ministry of Economic Development and Poverty Reduction in Uzbekistan. So thank you very much to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mauran. cooperative. And hello? So, and yeah, and and that can be justified, with several factors. First of all, as I already mentioned, that the current growth rate or our target growth rate, which is like around 6%, 5 to 6%, for the upcoming next 5 years or until 2030, where we want to achieve, actually, I mentioned 2,800 by 2026, but our goal to achieve more than 4,000 by 2030 and go to the upper group of the middle income countries. So all of them, they require the energy consumption, whether you want or not, despite the fact that we put in our growth model, the increasing the energy efficiency. And, the fact is that we are, putting the higher share of the increasing share of the renewable energies. First of all, last year it was somewhere around 5%. Now, 2026, we are achieving 2000. We are putting a target to increase the share of the renewable energies by 20, up to 25% in overall energy consumption. Currently it's just below, it was about 80, close to 85%, but most electricity was produced like 80 or 85% from the natural gas. Now it's going below, and we already started to launch several PPP projects on the solar stations, wind energy. But on a parallel way, we started to implement, to modernize the existing electricity stations, where the productivity increased by, in some cases, by 2 times, by 1.5 times, even sometimes even higher. So they are producing more electricity, but using the less natural gas. I mean, all of them actually, first of all, increasing this electricity supply, but from the other side, also, bringing us to the fact that we have to think about the energy efficiency as well. I mean, I started to speak about the energy efficiency because comparing to the different, analysis, also we take the data from the World Bank and we see that energy efficiency is from 3 to 6 times, in a relatively worse situation in Uzbekistan. How we can do this? Yes, I forgot to say one of the fact that we are slowly moving out of this, situation where we were, historically subsidizing the electricity and energy price as well. So, which can be also contrary to the fact that, you would stimulate the consumption of the natural gas and electricity because of the lower price. And that's another fact. We are now in the process of, rounding up or finishing our forecasts and then, determining the key policy priorities for the upcoming 3 years. I mean, in terms of the, like the step-by-step, as many governments, we are also doing a revision of our, the policy measures and the tariff reforms, which are also reflected or attracted in our agenda, government policy agenda for the for the next year, 2023, is also considered as a key measure. So that's the main thing that will push many sectors of the economy towards the energy efficiency, but it's also about the competitiveness. It's also the fact that it will provide the growth. The next thing is that agriculture sector, land and water resources are relatively have a kind of a good resource, a good potential for implementing the innovative and green technologies. Yes, Central Asia, Uzbekistan is already facing the problems of the climate change, and we can feel, on our skin that the water is becoming more and more scarce, and agriculture sector in some sense is already suffering. But our discussions with different experts, I mean international experts and different field specialists, they put some optimistic, vision in a sense that we still have a good room to support the agriculture sector because most of the land is arable and they use the irrigation system. And here we also have a good potential by using the existing water resource more efficiently. This have like a water droppings system, and also and maybe I can't tell it in English way, but different technologies which allow they use the water in the agriculture sector efficiently. Also, using the land resource by integrating to the knowledge and innovative hubs as well. And this is on the water in the agriculture sector. But also, I want to say about the drinking water as well. Here we also looking at good potential where we could, by changing the tariffs, bring some good efficiency as well. Another sector, as Guilherme I think mentioned, is the construction sector. Yes, construction sector is maybe the main contributor, but we have to make a kind of a research, and that's one of the important topics that is evolving currently. Also based on our recent trip to France, where we were able to see some construction site on the Olympic Village, where using the different construction materials, including stone fibers and other materials, which, first of all, the production of these materials, they have a less carbon footprint, and from the other side, they will allow to increase the energy efficiency of the rooms or the office by up by 2.5 or 3 times, and but in case of Uzbekistan, it can be even 6 times. And that can be also a growth driving factor in the sense of, because you start to utilize the production of the new construction materials. But from the other side, it will allow you. Just a second.
Minister, if you can conclude.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
And I mean, this construction material can be, utilizing or, adapting technologies to this new construction materials can be also a growth driving factor. And one area that we are looking at that growth can be, also supported is that, the mining sector, where we are thinking about to develop a copper cluster, because we have, our different analysis that already done is showing that we have a good, reserves of the copper. But currently, we are mainly exporting the copper as a raw material mainly, but if organizing the copper clusters and producing the copper wires, and also we have a lithium reserves as well. So the copper wires and lithium reserves, they allow us to to launch several projects, such as a production of LFP batteries for electric mobiles, electric cars as well. So the last 5 years, we increased the production of the cars. We have our own production, joint organization, joint company with General Motors. But it is, our aim to switch to, the existing production to electric mobiles. I mean, this can be also, from one side, greening the production, but from the other side, it's a growth, a supportive area. Services sector, the key bottleneck is the connectivity for Uzbekistan, both internal and external, and all of them requires us thinking about the building the new railways and we already see that, increasing flow of domestic and international tourists, are, they're requiring and demanding us to build more and more, a means of connectivity. Mainly it is, we are now considering it, to seek the possibility of building the new fast train railways. And that can be also greening the transportation system, and but also allowing the services sector to grow faster. Digital, of course,
Minister, I will ask you, I'm sorry, to conclude because our
yeah.
time is
Okay,
finished.
sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. And just 1 minute, yeah, last minute. So basically, all of them, it is a good topic to discuss and further. I think, it would be great if you could, keep on discussing on these topics. Maybe we can make a kind of a forward-looking analysis and give some, bring some key messages, in the sense that, how will the economies evolve in the next 10 or 20, even 30 years, if they apply the green model or not, and also bring some direct and indirect costs as well. I didn't speak about the indirect costs as like a changing environment on the health, etc., because the health also requires or puts some fiscal burden for the governments as well, and also the productivity, etc., etc. I will stop here, and sorry for talking too much. It was very interesting.
Thank,
Thank you.
thank you, Minister. Very important contribution, and we thank you a lot for your participation. As we don't have more time, I will ask you very quickly if you can say your last words, and also we hope you can keep this debate specifically, because I think there is one point that every one of you talk about. It's about structural transition, structural change. So how you can keep it changing and exchanging proposals in this issue, so we can really go to a real future that every country can, for developing country, can benefit for this change for the future. So I will pass for José Eduardo.
I hope these are not my last words. Well, I would like to say that the structural change that we need is an opportunity now. We see that there are a lot of risks if we stay as we at a business as usual. So it is really important to find a way to move away from the current economic structure that we have in at least in Latin America, and the carbon-based economy that we have all over the world. And we see that it's not a bad news. It's a good news that we are moving away from that, and there are a lot of opportunity and for job creation, for reducing poverty to change. So I will take this. My comment would be this optimistic one. Thank you.
Thank you. João Paulo, please.
Thank you, Martin. I'll be brief as well. Just summarizing the conclusions from the session as well. I guess that what we are all concerned is with the balance of climate goals and development goals. So both policies can be combined, and also that the South can be heard in this climate structure change effort. So we can also have structure change in the financial markets and in developing countries' economic structure.
Thank you, João Paulo. And now, Guilherme, your last input.
I'd like to thank you all for this discussion. I think it's like we said a lot of things about like how to make it and the problems that we face when making this transition. And it's clear that like without strengthening value chains, strengthening the economy, we cannot make it. If you're thinking, for example, about like lithium production, it's not about producing lithium. It's like about like creating a value chain on lithium production, because it's proven that the natural resource-based model failed, and all countries that depend on these failed. The countries that make it were able to use this to promote some social development, and now let's say, a just transition, were those countries that were able to produce the machineries, were able to produce the inputs, and were able to add value in the production that they are making. So it's clear, and the examples that the successful examples that we have from Uzbekistan are those exactly that went into this direction. So it's like this. This is the way. There is no. Of course, the magic is how to make it happen, but there is no other way to make it this.
Thank you. And Mr. Norkulov, please, your
Yeah. I think I agree with the idea that the structural change should be adapted, and again, it has to be an effort on a global level. And climate change is the fact that that everyone is facing, and you cannot tackle it in a one country level. And the changing structure of working of the international financial institutions, the lending, reputational risks, the requirements on ASG, etc., they have to be carried on, and the key messages has to be more and more, like clear and loud, in the sense that that CBAM will be there, and the faster all countries, developing and developed countries, they react, they get prepared for that, they will be in a better and winning position. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much, our panelists. Thank you for the audience and also people that are watching us. And we hope this debate and important debate can keep growing, and then all the EU can be together for have these proposals, and we hope next COP have new things about that, how the development of the researchers is going. So thank you. Bye bye.